Hey friends, imagine a world where chaotic collections of file types and data are all organized with a single search. Vector search is the key that unlocks this possibility to take your user's experience to the next level. Liam is here today to help me and you unlock the potential of vector search with Azure Cognitive Search today on Azure Friday. Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman and it's Azure Friday. Liam is here today to talk to me about vector search in Azure Cognitive Search. How are you?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
No, I appreciate you hanging out because every time you come here, something gets better. That means that I'm going to learn something and I'm going to say, I can implement that right after the show. And I always do. So I'm excited to see what you have for me today.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I'm just so excited. We introduced on the 18th of July vector search, a public preview of this, and this has just been amazing. So, as you recall, at the Build conference, we talked a lot about ChatGPT and allowing organizations to be able to use their own data. And cognitive search, the product that I work on, is really a technology that really helps enable this. But we went even further by adding this vector search capability. So I'm really excited to talk about what this is and even some of the new scenarios of things that people can do even beyond text.
So if I understand correctly, vector search is a machine learning technique. Everyone's saying AI right now, but it's all machine learning underneath, right? And it takes meaning and content and unstructured data and it presents it in a way that is numbers. And then we can ask questions, and it's impossibly amazing. But there's real science beneath it.
It's true, and in fact, I have a little screen here. I'd love to just share with you that I like to use to think about this because what vectors are is just a set of numbers in vector space that describes that object, and that object could be text, could be images, could be molecules, right? What machine learning can do is it can take that object and describe it in a vector space so that it has a very clear meaning to it. And what's really cool about that, Scott, is once you have massive numbers of text vectors, what you can do is then you can start asking interesting questions like, hey, who is the CEO of Microsoft? And that query, that question gets vectorized. And what vector search or vector databases can do is allow you to go through that massive number of vectors to find, oh, what is the most relevant thing? Because that is so critical in virtually every case, whether it's enterprise ChatGPT or just any type of document search. You want to get the most relevant information based on what that user is asking. And this is what is really being unlocked with vector search.
Now, let me ask you if this is a very simple example, but like you know how you might have a database and you say select star from people with name and first name and last name, but someone else might say surname. If you were doing a formal query, you wouldn't find surname because there's not a column for that. The vagueness of that is too much. You have to be exact.
That's
But
right.
something like a vector search could allow me to say, what's Liam's surname? And it might actually answer the question, even though the data is not structured that way. Is that a fair analogy?
That's exactly right, Scott. Like one of the really great parts of using this vectors, and in particular, there is Azure OpenAI. One of the most popular models that we have is called Ada 002, which is one of the models available to be able to take text and actually create these embeddings from it. But just as you said, it is so amazing at being able to understand different semantics. Like if I put in Zurich and Switzerland is very similar, like that is something that is able to do, is able to find matches. But that's not to say that the traditional way of where we've been using search, where it's like, you know, different forms of words like run, runner, running, like things like that are still very important. And that's why within Azure Cognitive Search, we actually also have something called hybrid search, which allows you to use the best of both so that you can do a search which uses a score from vectors, which is really great for finding results. But sometimes, just as you said, it's just like a keyword or it's a phrase or some of the things that you want to do in traditional search. So we can use both, which is even better to find relevance regardless of how you're looking.
So let me ask you this. If I imagine a slider bar of search awesomeness, and we have just keyword search, just full text search, index of type of a search contains, string dot contains, and then I remember when fuzzy search came out, fuzzy text algorithms, and I was like, oh, fuzzy search. I misspelled their last name, but I found them anyway. And I was like, that's the most
Yeah.
amazing thing I can think of. Now it feels like some people out there in the computer science community want to just jump and just throw everything into a giant, very large language model. But it feels like vector search is going to be a much cheaper and effective way to get those magical AI slash ML experiences without the magical price tag.
Yeah, you're right on that too, Scott. Because if you look at it, the traditional search, like not only what you said, like think about phonetics. Think about my last name; it's spelled with a CAV, Cavanagh. Sometimes I go into a hotel and they spell it K and they put a U, and it's like that is completely wrong, right? And traditional search does great in there, but vector search maybe not so well. So being able to use both of these together actually outperforms it. And interestingly enough, Scott, what we find is that some people just jump to just pure vector search because it's really great, and this is what people are really talking about. But actually, in a lot of cases, vector search will actually perform worse than the traditional textual search. So that's why we felt it was so important to be able to offer both, so that you could use the best of both to be able to combine it and get, regardless of whether it's phrase or phonetic search or something where you need the semantics.
I love it. So I'm hearing I've got in my slider bar of awesomeness, I've got more stoppers that I can select, more tools in my toolbox,
Exactly.
and hopefully you have a demo that's going to make me want to plug this in today.
I do, and I'd love to show that to you if you don't mind, Scott.
Please.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just through a really quick code snippet how this all works. And I want to give you a couple of examples so you can see it through code so you can get an idea of what it's doing. But then I'm going to show you another example, which actually goes and leverages images to be able to search images. So what I'm going to do here, Scott, is I just want to show you a little bit of Python code. And I'm going to, as you can see, and we'll provide links to this, we actually have all this code so people can dig in deeper. But basically what we're doing in this Python code is we're just importing a bunch of cognitive search, our cognitive search SDK. We're importing some OpenAI aspects. I'm loading my configuration, which has all the information of how to connect to my cognitive search service. And I have my information how to connect to my Azure OpenAI instance so that I can do the vectorization. And I'm going to let me just run that and just go through. And so what I was mentioning to you earlier, Scott, is that in this case, the vast majority of our customers actually use the text embeddings A002, which comes from Azure OpenAI, to be able to take text, convert it to those vectors in a very meaningful way. So all this function does is it just takes text and it spits out numbers. In fact, let me just give you a little example here where you can actually see what it's doing. I'm going to pass in this text, and you can see how it just created these numbers. Like this means nothing to you and me. I hope it doesn't mean anything to you, but basically this is the description of it in the vector space, which is great. So now if let me just get this out. And now what I'm going to do is let's just say I have all this text that I want to be able to use to be able to search through. I want to put it into my ChatGPT application, or I just want to do document search. And I have things like about Satya Nadella, Bill Gates, Shakespeare, a little bit about myself, and just some a random text here.
Some of the
The other,
big heavies in history.
that's right. We'll see if we can tweak it to make it me look a little bit more important than I am. But yeah, that's a good point. The other thing that's great about here is that you'll notice here that we actually have other metadata like categories. When you're referring to that vector search, sometimes you not want to make it so that it's not only just about the most relevant vectors. Like imagine I'm going to a jewelry store and I wanted to, I had a necklace that my wife has, and I want to say, hey, I want to find some earrings that look like it. Well, I can put in that image, find similar necklaces, but then using filtering, I can actually say, no, 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 I want earrings. So being able to combine this in a traditional search way is pretty cool. So I'm going to take this content and I'm basically just going to, for every single document, I'm just going to create a vector embedding for it. And so as I remember, it just went to Azure OpenAI, created those vectors. And if we look at one of them, you can see here, for Satya Nadella, this is the description of it. and I'm going to load it into my cognitive search index. We have an ID, the category, the content, and the vector. It just gets stored in there, right? We're just going to store that in, upload the information, loaded those 5 documents, and I'm ready to go. So now what I can do is I can start searching against it. Like if you remember up here, I had some text and there was something about Bill Gates. And you'll notice here, way over, it talked about his childhood friend, Paul Allen. So I'm going to throw in a word and I'm just going to say
Right.
buddies. I'm just going to,
Who's mentioned, but is not in its own column. He's not an entity
no,
in this list of historical heavies. Paul Allen doesn't exist yet. He's
exactly.
only casually mentioned. Okay.
So I can put in that search query, passive cognitive search, and I want to do, I'm going to take that query and just like before, I'm going to vectorize it. And I say, hey, cognitive search, please try to find me the most relevant passage based on that. And you can see here, even though there's no reference to the word buddies, just as you said, like the idea that it's semantically similar allows me to do that. And I can even do cool things like now I throw in like a French version, like childhood friends in French. You know, same thing. I can put in you know amigos, whatever, right? Like I or amigo. Let's put that, and we can see here. So all of these things, like this model, is so impressive to be able to handle things, to be able to find those matches back, Scott.
So let me ask you this, though. I noticed that you're saying generate embeddings in the vector as a, I mean, this is my ignorance speaking, but like I'm thinking about this in the context of an index or a
Mhm.
composite index. This is a bit of an analogy stretch, rather. But could you generate this and store this, or is this generating it every time? Is there overhead there? It feels like it's almost like you're generating an index and then you're querying in the index.
That's a great question, Scott, because the only thing that we're generating at this point is taking that search query that that user is performing and
Ah,
and vectorizing that. All of the content has already been processed. It's already ready to go. And that's one of the advantages of our search is that all of that's ready to go. So it doesn't matter if it's 5 examples or millions. We can go through that very quickly because you never want to have to take
right,
all of your content and pass it to OpenAI because that would get
right.
really
Okay,
expensive very quickly.
so to use my kind of 30-year-old SQL understanding, you can have column indexes, you can have composite indexes, and then we have our vector embeddings, our vector query index of sorts is already generated. And then if I make a change to that Bill Gates and added another friend,
Mhm.
when I do that update, I would need to then update the vector as well.
That is correct. So not only like we in this case are storing both the text as well as the vector, and I'll show you why that's useful in a minute. But you're right. If I update that text, then that also needs to revectorize that content. So because it will change those numbers slightly.
Interesting. And is that something that I would need to do at this level, at the coding level? Because you did those generations yourself earlier in the notebook.
Yeah.
Or can I set the system up to do that kind of like detect that I made a change and regenerate that vector? And can that be done asynchronously from an ACID perspective? It might cost me a little bit.
So with Cognitive Search, you actually have multiple options. So you can use a push model where you just send us, like in this case, I just sent the vector to Cognitive Search and it stored it and made it searchable. We also have something called the indexer, which is a non coding option for you to just crawl data sources to be able to say, get the text from your PDFs and process them and put them in Cognitive Search. So this is an option where you can actually plug this right into the indexer so that it can do that vectorization automatically for you. So whenever a document changes, it would just pick it up, rebring
Hmm.
it in, and apply it to your content.
I'm just thinking about, I mean, my brain is exploding with all the cool stuff I could do. I've got, as an example, over 900 episodes of my podcast, and we have over
Mm.
800 episodes of Azure Friday. You could take all of this content that we have, 800 episodes of Azure Friday, take the transcript of them, and then generate vectors on those transcripts and go, Hanselman did a talk with Liam, what's his name? Very nice Canadian fella. And they find it based on that kind of vague search. And then they go and they jump into this episode.
Yeah, I would actually suggest that we could actually go better than that, because not only can you use the text, but think of all the videos, all the images that get displayed as well. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could say, I saw this video and Liam showed me this image of like a vector search, or like imagine if it could actually go through either the images or the audio or other things. And those are the things that we can do. So we shouldn't just think about text. We can go
Mm.
even further beyond that.
Right. I want to see the episode where Scott wore his Microsoft Bob shirt.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. You could definitely do that.
So you point out images because we can generate vectors from images. We have the text as well. You showed multiple languages. What if I had an opaque, a PDF or a made up file that's like, .scott. That's my own thing. Could I generate vectors that describe that? Or maybe I work for a construction company and I have a description of what a house looks like, but it's in some custom format. How would I search inside of a file that you don't understand?
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the most exciting. Well, one of the many things that's exciting that's happening lately is just the sheer number of new models that are being created in the world. Like, for example, I was just reading there's some really interesting ones in the healthcare space where it can actually look at a molecule and be able to understand that. So it converts that molecule, so you can ask really interesting questions like, what would happen if I combine these molecules together? Like, that is something that's very trained on that very specific area. In the energy space, they have their own specific document formats. So being able to create models for that, it's all mapping it to a set of numbers. So as long as that model can be trained to be able to understand that and map it, that is an option now.
Very cool. All right. So how do I do it? What's the next tab? How do I get there?
Cool. So let me show you one final thing, and then I'll show you how we get going. So I'm gonna just throw in this other one, just because I think it's really important to really understand, uh, the power of using not just vectors. So I'm gonna search for the word Azure Search here, and I'm gonna perform that. Now you'll notice that there was a couple of things that came back. We noticed here that it searched for, and it said, oh yeah, it's like talked about Azure and search. He searched for an answer. And so, like, from the vector space, that was pretty close. But you know what? If we look at here, this is also an answer, and this might be more what I wanted. And so, by using what we have, which is called hybrid search, which takes into account the more traditional way of searching using text as well as vectors, we can actually go beyond that. So we can do those things that you're mentioning, such as, fuzziness or phonetics. And all I need to do is change the query and just add the query to my search. And now all of a sudden, we're able to get a much better result. And so that's why it's important to think that it's not just about vector search. It's using all of these great techniques that we have available to find the most relevant information.
Now, this isn't intended as a gotcha, but I think it is worth noting that why the scores went from being confidence numbers to now being the same exact score for each of those two records right there. Is that to be expected?
So just has to be, that has to do with something that we have, which is called reciprocal rank uh, fusion, which basically just combines the score. It looks at the rank and reorders them. We are looking at adding alternate options because, just as you said, a lot of people want to have scores in a more normalized way. So that's just a factor of right now. But you're right. Like, it right now is looking like the same score, but it did under the covers find that this was more relevant.
Interesting. This
Cool.
is super cool. All right, I'm in. Take my
Cool.
money.
So let me show you one thing final, and just to like lay it on the side, and then I'll show you where to go. So
All right,
let's
let's do it.
say this is more final application. Say I'm searching for images. There's no
Okay.
text in here. This is using, I know you were talking to the Adina from the Vision team about the Florence model. This is
Yeah.
using the Florence model. This is multimodal, understands text and images, so that I can actually go through and I say, okay, no, I want a red dress. And then I say, no, I want a fancy red dress. Like, all of these things.
Does it see the alleyway?
Uh, Sorry. Oh, did you want to ask about the
Well,
alleyway?
I'm looking at the young lady in the middle with the alleyway. I mean, like, does it dress in an alleyway or dress on the street or walking down the street? Like everyone else has got a nice background.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
So
and
it,
they look at, and then another one shows up there who's not maybe a puffy jacket qualifies as a dress, but now we have that alleyway. So it
yeah,
really sees all.
it does. It understands so many things, and these things are just really fascinating. Like I can throw this in French, and it understands that. So I'm really hoping that your viewers will like be inspired by this and start taking a look at our vector search, which we, as I mentioned, we announced in public preview on the 18th of July.
Well, what I love about stuff like this that again you can implement right away is that this is how our viewers get promoted. Is because you go and you implement vector search, you put in Azure Cognitive Search, you set this up, and you don't tell your boss how you did it, and then your brilliance gets you gets you to the next level.
Exactly, absolutely.
Okay, so this is in preview right now, and I can implement it immediately.
You can use it absolutely today.
Absolutely. Is it preview or GA right now?
It's public preview.
Public preview. Fantastic. Well, this has been so informative. Thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Oh, thank you, Scott.
I am learning about how to unleash the power of vector search with Azure Cognitive Search today on Azure Friday. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Azure Friday. Now I need you to like it, comment on it, tell your friends, retweet it. Watch more Azure Friday.